Well, Riskonet Africa says that South Africa needs to urgently prioritise infrastructure management in order to avoid the failure of key infrastructure. The organisation says that the disruption of water supplies in numerous Johannesburg suburbs following significant repair to the Rand Water bulk pipeline illustrates the risk associated with idleness in prioritising infrastructure management. Now, Riskonet also says that the country needs to critically examine its risk management approach, and this holds a potential to transforming the country's performance, which translates into service delivery and contributes towards a healthy economy. Now, Volker von Widdern is a risk principal at Riskonet Africa, and he joins us now for a discussion. Volker, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you, and to you and your viewers.
So first off, why is it important for government and, of course, its agencies to ensure that infrastructure management is prioritized and that it performs optimally?
I think a couple of the key reasons would be that infrastructure is a resource that's relied upon for consistency. So infrastructure will work for many years, decades. And the difficulty is when it breaks, and it's significant infrastructure, it can break severely. Now, of course, the outages. Apologies. Yeah, are you there?
I'm still here.
Yeah, the outages that we had in the Johannesburg were planned outages. The point around it is that the degree of the planned outages and the knock-on effects are the issues that we think about. And risk management goes to standards. So let's say a standard was that we don't accept that the outage is as long as it takes, as much as it was moderated. But let's say the standard was 12 hours and not 1 week. What would you do to make sure that the outage was never more than 12 hours? And operational standards and risk management standards work very closely hand in hand. And when infrastructure is maintained to minimize those kind of outages, a much better plan is monitored through the environment, which means that the testing, the facilities, the possible leaks, the need for upgrades. And then when an upgrade takes place, service delivery as far as minimized outages is the priority. So if there was a standard that was 12 hours in this case, then maybe one of the alternatives wasn't just you must wait for water. One of them could have been temporary water silos. Another one could have been temporary pipes that routed water around where the repair took place. And I realize these are just high-level ideas, but the point is the planning and the thinking about that to meet a standard that doesn't significantly interrupt reasonable standards. And the same applies to multiple areas of infrastructure. The second main point is that when significant breakages happen, they're much more expensive than when we're doing the work regularly and consistently through the process, and well-maintained assets last longer. We know, for example, of power stations in Poland, coal-fired, that are 100 years old. They're not breaking, but they're really maintained diligently and on proper measurements throughout their life cycles. And that's what happens when you're really maintaining infrastructure well.
So, Volker, when you talk about risk management, and very often, when one reads reports as well, it seems to be an emphasis on financial risk rather than looking at infrastructure. And I'm not sure, just how extensively you've looked at that, but do you find that to be the case in our municipalities by and large?
Well, if we can interpret financial risk in this way, risk management is often about what are the key risk indicators. And as I mentioned earlier, if we aren't testing our pipes or testing what's happening underground or looking for maybe cavities or sinkholes and things like that, if we're not doing that on a regular basis, we know trouble's coming. Now, one of the key indicators of that is what is the proportion of the budget or the revenue pool that a local authority gets to do that kind of work. And again, it's been reported that an increasing proportion of the budgets are allocated to salaries and less to actual maintenance and infrastructure upgrades. Well, if you're spending less money on the infrastructure, you're going to be doing less work. On top of that, it is concerning to see that even when the money is spent, it's not quite going to the right places. So that also hurts infrastructure. So that's a form of financial risk, which includes prioritization, fraud, and making sure that the required standards are being maintained and the right funds are being allocated. The upside of that, by the way, is that if there was more water in the pipes, and more electricity in our cables, we would sell more services as local authorities and make more money. So actually, there's a huge upside to maintaining good infrastructure and distributing that to the local population.
And, considering that the city of Johannesburg, for example, we were meant to speak to the mayor earlier. Unfortunately, he didn't show. But this is one of the questions that I wanted to raise with him. If the city spends about 40% of its budget on salaries, and then you still have contractors and then the agencies, how much does that actually leave a city like Johannesburg to do the sort of work that you allude to? But with that said, you also touch on a very important issue, Volker, given what happened in the city of Johannesburg this week. So without necessarily venturing into a further realm of speculation as to what actually happened, just thinking about it in terms of the infrastructure above the ground that we see not being maintained, one has to then start thinking, when last did we have a good look at what's happening below the surface and just doing an assessment of what's going on there?
Well, yes, again, a couple of years ago, it was reported that Johannesburg is actually one of the best tunnel networks that is known, because that's how the city was built many, many years ago. So we have some infrastructure, and the question is, what are we doing about it? Because the classic saying, forewarned is forearmed. And part of the key maintenance routines and the testing environments to look for things. Now, that's natural things. It could be water comes and goes. It could be there's a major earth tremor. It could be other things. But regular inspections, and of course I'm saying regular inspections are happening. By no means are we saying nothing is happening. But the point is that when it's important to maintain that standard of what kind of inspection happens on a regular basis, or when new pipes have come in, or there has been a water leak in an area, water leaks lead to cavities in the ground. Apologies.
All right.
Apologies.
There you are. Volker, I think we just got you back.
Sorry, there's a line connection problem. Sorry. We've had our difficulties today.
No problem.
So the point around it is, you can look for areas of potential concern on a regular basis. It doesn't mean we can see the future and we'll be perfect about risk management, but it's the structure and the approach that needs to be maintained in all the key areas. And obviously, the failure of underground infrastructure has related implications, such as cavities. There's a sinkhole in the highway going to Pretoria. Those kind of things develop over time because of what's happening underground. And to that point, you have to wonder then as well, Volker, about whether we actually have the necessary capacity in terms of human capital to deal with this, because we also know sometimes the municipalities struggle to fill key positions in that regard, especially with regard to engineers. So just your parting shot for us on this, Volker, because I think if we consider the fact that 2 days later, we still don't know what the actual cause of that explosion was in Johannesburg, it is worrying. Yeah, so again, I come back to standards. If there is no city engineer, that is a risk. Okay, now what is the standard that holds that environment or that executive authority accountable? So it's like saying we're going to drive a car without a driver's license. That is just not acceptable. And I think those are when you talked about financial risk, I think the overarching thing is governance risk. And if we're running cities and major areas without engineers, without the technical staff, we're not maintaining and monitoring to the appropriate standard, that is an unacceptable risk. And I think people need to be aware of it. It can be fixed in a variety of ways with partnerships, but not to have the right people at a minimum standard in the right places is a fundamental risk.
And I think those are some of the questions that will be asked and hopefully answered over the coming days and weeks. Volker von Widdern, thanks so much for your time. A risk principal at Riskonet Africa, discussing with us some of the risk analysis made by the organization on, among others, the recent water outages in many areas of Johannesburg due to planned infrastructure maintenance, and how the maintenance process should have perhaps been better planned.